Today on our 2011 F-250, we're going to be taking a look at and installing the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 helper springs, part number AL57396. So here's what our airbags look like installed. They're going to replace our factory joust stops, and these are going to provide up to 5,000 pounds of load leveling support, keeping the strain off your rear suspension and giving it a smoother ride. Features a manual adjustment valve. And in our application, we have it going to a Y, so we only have one fitting for both airlines. Now, as you can see, we can either let air out. We're just going to lower the ride of our vehicle, or we can add more air, and it has an operating range between 5 and 100 psi. Now, when adding air, if you have a heavy load in the back, simply add air to the fitting. You get to your desired height to where your truck levels out nicely. The real main reason for these air springs is to help level out your truck when you have a heavy load. Now, the main benefit of these is that they're fully adjustable, and they can go from a small amount of air, if it's not that heavy, to a lot of air, up to 100 psi, if you have an extra heavy load. So if you tow different things, these are going to be great because of the added adjustability. At factory height, with no load and no airbags, the back of our truck sat at 42 inches and the front was right at 41 inches. Now, with a load but no airbags, and it was around 900 to 1,000 pound load, the rear end dropped down about 2 inches. Now, when we took our vehicle on to our test course, with the load in the back and no airbags, I can tell you right away, it did ride a lot rougher, didn't want to respond as quickly, and just overall, you could definitely tell that I was towing something in the back extremely heavy. Now, this is where our airbags come into play. Once they were installed and we put that same load in the back, we actually leveled the truck out back to exactly it was with the factory without the load at 42 inches in the rear and 41 inches in the front with only 45 pounds of air. Now, when we took the truck out the second time after the airbags installed on our test course, I can tell you right away that it was much more comfortable and much more responsive. Over the speed bumps, they weren't as harsh and not so jarring. And when we went through our slalom course, it genuinely felt like the truck wanted to go faster and it wasn't swaying as much because of the load. Now that we've gone over some of the features, I'll go ahead and show you how we got it installed. To begin our installation, we're going to have to remove our factory joust stops. And I'm going to be using a 15mm socket to take that off. Now, if you come on the inside of the frame rail here, there's going to be a 15mm nut. And just move the wires out of the way so you can gain access to it. Now, I do want to mention that these joust stops are not going to be reused. And also, it helps if you put a little bit of penetrating oil on the nut on top, because it is going to take a little bit of elbow grease to get it off. Now that we have this one off, we're going to repeat the same process on the other side. So this is going to be our driver's side upper bracket. And the way we're going to install this is we're going to take our large nut, put a flat washer on there. And this is going to go through the frame rail right here. That's going to be followed by another 1/2 inch flat washer and our flange nut on this side. Just like that. As far as this hole goes, we're going to take our smaller M8 bolt, followed by a flat washer, and that's going to go through our frame, followed by another flat washer, and then finally we're going to be putting a lock nut on the end. Now, I'm showing you this on the table here because there is limited room, and I want to be able to make sure that you understand how all the hardware is going to go into place. So our bracket's going to go into place over our factory harness here. We're just going to leave this up there loosely while I grab the hardware. Now, with this bolt through our small hole in our frame here, just going to put the flat washer and lock it out on the back, hand tight, just so that bracket will stay in place. Now we can put in the other bolt. Okay, now we can take our larger bolt and we feed it through our frame. And we're going to follow it up with our flat washer on the outside of our frame, and then our flange nut on top of that. Now we're just gonna leave everything loose, and we're gonna do it hand tight, just so the bracket will support itself and it won't fall out. Next step for installation is gonna be assembling our airbags. And we're gonna take our plates right here, and I'm just gonna set this one on top for now. And we're gonna take this other one, we're gonna line up the 3 holes so that it fits just like that. We're gonna place it on top. Next, we can take our fitting, we can screw it in, just hand tight right now. And come back with a 1/2 inch wrench and tighten it down. We just need to go ahead and screw down our fitting just far enough that the thread seal tape is going to make contact inside of our threads. We're going to take our lower cup bracket and a 5/16 by 3/4 carriage bolt. And I'm going to put the carriage bolt in there just like that. We're going to take our lower bracket, making sure that the cutouts are facing up, and we're going to drop our bolt into the slotted hole right here, just like that. Now if we flip it over, this is the bolt that was sticking out. I'm going to be putting a lock nut on the bottom. Now you don't want to tighten this down all the way, just tight enough so that the plate will still swivel. And I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch wrench to tighten this down. And you still want movement in there after you tighten it down. Now I do want to mention that if you're looking at the bracket and you have these squares facing you, the hole, when you're facing it on the right side, is going to be the hole you're going to use for the driver's side. And the other side is going to be for the passenger side if it's facing this way. Now we can take one of our long carriage bolts and we're going to drop it right through that hole. And since again, it's on the driver's side, we're using this side of the bracket. Now, when we get ready to mount our bag, I do want to mention there is 4 holes here. Now, depending on the orientation, which side you're going to be putting it on, this is our left side. So we have our carriage bolt here and our mounting cup bolt right there. So we're going to be using this far left lower hole and the upper right hole when our bolts look like that. So I'm going to go ahead and mark them, making it a little bit easier for you to see, as well as when it comes to mounting it. So we'll mark one side, we're going to flip our bracket over, then I can mark the other side. We're going to set our bracket down right here. And for illustration purposes, we're going to be bolting this to our bag to the bracket. But the way this has to sit, you want to make sure that your airline fitting is facing away from the tabs that are on our bracket right here. Okay, now I just flip the bag over and we're going to take some cap screws. We're going to put them down there hand tight for now, just to get them started. Now I'm going to come back with a 7/32 Allen socket and tighten them all up. Now when you're tightening these down, you don't want to go over 20 foot-pounds of torque. For now, we're going to set our lower assembly aside and we're going to grab the driver's upper bracket. And we're going to take our 3/8 by 2 inch carriage bolt, and up here at the top, that's where that one's going to go. And that's going to be followed by 2 1 1/4 inch carriage bolts, which are going to go in these holes right here, just like that. Now with our carriage bolts in place, I'm going to take our bracket, I'm going to slip it over our fitting, I'm going to line up the holes on top. I'm going to take my bolt with a lock washer and a flat washer, and I'm going to thread my upper plate onto my airbag. Then we're going to put the other bolt in, We're gonna get these nice and snug by hand and then come back and tighten them down. In order for us to get our airbag in place, I'm gonna be using this pole jack here to lift up just a little bit to give us that extra room in between the axle and the top section of our jout stop. And you can do this at home as long as you lift by the frame and then let the axle sag down. This is going to be how your airbag is going to sit in there. These tabs right here with the 3 holes are going to be going towards the outside of the wheel, and this long carriage bolt is going to sit on the back side of the axle. Now, I do want to mention also, this long carriage bolt is needed to go on the inside between this hard brake line and the axle. Once we have everything loosely lined up, we're going to come back and we're going to take our spacer block here, and if we collapse our airbag just enough, we're going to come back to the long carriage bolt in the back section, and we're going to put our spacer block just like that. We're going to feed it up into the hole in the frame. We're going to make sure that our other carriage bolts are lined up with our bracket. We're going to come and we're going to take our U-bolt, and that tab I was mentioning earlier with the 3 holes, we're going to be using the topmost hole. So we're going to take our U-bolt and we're going to come behind our springs, and we're going to feed it through. We're going to follow it with a flat washer, followed by a locking nut. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side of our U-bolt. And now with those on there hand tight, we can come back and snug them up. I'm going to be using a 9/16 socket to snug these up. You do want to alternate front to back to make sure you're tightening down evenly. I do want to mention that you only want to tighten it enough so that this bracket touches and makes contact with the leaf spring. Now, if we come to the front end of our vehicle, you see that we have one remaining hole for our carriage bolt, and that's where we're going to be putting this long carriage bolt through. So we're just going to come up top, drop it down. Now we're going to take this bracket and we're going to feed our carriage bolts through the bottom. And it's going to sit just like this against the axle. But first, we're going to take a flat washer, followed by a 3/8 lock nut, and attach it. Now we're only going to put this on there hand tight for right now, just enough to get the other bolts on so the bracket doesn't fall off. We're going to repeat the same process on the other carriage bolts. Our flat washer first, followed by our 3/8 lock nut. Now with our carriage bolts right here and the other side back here, we're going to put a flat washer and then a 3/8 locking nut on top of that. And we're using a 9/16 socket to tighten these down. Our bolt here that went up through our frame, we're going to be using a 3/8 flange nut and attaching it up there. Now this is where the bolt's going to come out, and it's going to be kind of hard to see with the wiring and everything in the way, but I'm going to be using a 9/16 socket or wrench, whatever I can get on it, to tighten it up. Now with everything tight, we can go ahead and start tightening our U-bolts. And again, we want to alternate from front to back when we're tightening it, so not to bind anything up. We're going to come back to our bolt right here on our lower bracket that we left slightly loose, and we're going to go ahead and finish and tighten that up and snug it down the rest of the way. Then I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch wrench. Now we're going to come back to our outside frame rail and a large bolt here. We're going to hold the nut with a 3/4 inch wrench. We're going to the inside of the frame rail using a 3/4 inch socket, and we're going to tighten it down. for the smaller nut and bolt, we're going to be using a 1/2 inch wrench on the nut and a 1/2 inch socket on the bolt on the other side of the frame. Now, with everything installed on the driver's side, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process and install the assembly on the right side. Now, with both our bags installed, we can go ahead and begin to run our airline tube. Now, we're going to need to find the center. So if you take the two ends and you put them together, then we come to the other end of our airline tube. This is going to be our center. And whenever you cut an airline tube, you're going to want to use a tubing cutter. You're not going to want to use pliers. Now, if you don't have one, you can pick one up on our website using part number AL10530. And I'm just going to put my airline tube in the cutter and squeeze it. And now we have two equal length airline tubes. Now, if we take the fresh cut end of our new airline tube, we come up to our airbag. We can see our fitting right here. And we're just going to take the end of our air hose and we're going to insert it into the fitting and push it in until it locks. Now, it may take a little patience because there's not a lot of room and it does have a swivel fitting on there. But we're going to push that airline in as hard as we can and then double check by pulling on it to make sure that it locked into place. Now, everyone is going to run their airlines a little bit differently and stay away from any moving parts or anything that's hot. So right here underneath the driver's side of the hitch is where I have my airlines tubing coming out right now. Now, in our application, we're not going to have two separate fittings. We're actually going to tie them together using this T. That way, one airline is going to control both airbags. Now, to pick up this part number on our website, use part number AL21838. We're going to need to cut off the ends of our hose. Now, we're going to leave a little bit of hose here so that we can feed it through to connect to our T connector and we can still have our fitting so we can fill it up with air. Now, we're just going to go ahead and cut off the fitting on the other end of the hose. Now, the way I ran my airline is from my bag, I went over the rear shock mount, then I went over the spare tire and the spare tire mount, and I came out right behind the hitch here. On the passenger side here, I went through my top bracket and putting the sleeve for the protective sleeve by the exhaust on my hose. And then I did the same thing. I went over my spare tire bracket, the airline right here, and I brought it over so we could meet up with the other one. This is where we marked where we want our airlines to come through and have our fitting installed. And we're gonna need to drill a 5/16 hole. Now, you do wanna mind what's behind here and be careful of any wires, and you don't wanna drill into your spare tire. So now we're gonna take that piece that we cut off with a little bit of extra hose. We're gonna put the supplied nut under our fitting, followed by a star washer, and then we're gonna come up to the bumper and feed it through. It's gonna poke through like that, and now we're gonna follow it with a rubber washer, followed by a flat washer, and finally another nut on the end to tighten everything up. Just like that. Now on the back end of our fitting there, we're gonna take a piece of the hose and we're gonna put it into this part of our T fitting, and then our airlines are gonna come out to here going to the airbags. So this is how our fitting is gonna look at the back of our airline. And then now, with this in place, we can go ahead and hook up our two airbags to the T fitting. Next, I do wanna mention, you can see that our exhaust is extremely close to our airbag. So in the kit, they supplied us with a heat shield. So we're gonna take the tabs, we're gonna bend it so that it's like that. And then we're gonna take this and we're gonna put it against our exhaust right here in between the airbag. And we're gonna take the supplied hose clamps and we're gonna double them up so that two of them are one, and we're gonna go ahead and attach it. We're gonna be using an 8mm bolt to tighten up our hose clamps. And when you're installing this, you wanna make sure that there's about a 1/2 inch gap of airspace in between the heat shield and the muffler itself. So now with our heat shield in place and our system all installed, I'm gonna go ahead and put some air in the bags. And now we can check for leaks. Now I'm just gonna be using some soapy water. I'm gonna spray down all my fittings and my hoses. I'm looking for bubbles that form, that grow bigger and pop. These small bubbles, those are okay because that's just from the soap. Spray down my bag and my fitting. Now, we didn't find any leaks, but we're gonna go back and we're gonna double check and we're gonna go ahead and tie up all our airlines to make it nice and neat. And that'll finish up the look at the Air Lifter LoadLifter 5000 helper springs, part number AL57396 on our 2011 Ford F-250.
Click the link below to shop, learn more, or visit us at eTrailer.com.